This is what happens when you cut corners, both while flying and also while building. Today we're going to learn how to fix this and potentially keep it from happening in the future. Stay tuned. So the first corner I cut was the corner of my driveway. Cut it too close, coming around the corner, and I clipped a ghost branch, which ordinarily wouldn't have been a problem. However, because I cut a second corner while putting this motor on my little Diatone GTR 90, it turned out to be a big problem. The branch apparently grabbed the motor wires, ripped the motor off of the arm, and therefore pulled the wires from the motor itself. There are no wires attached to this motor anymore. Now what I've already done is I've desoldered the wires that were initially on the ESC here. The wires were just dangling, and this motor I actually found laying in the yard when I went to pick up the quadcopter after the initial crash from the ghost branch. So what we're going to do today is we're going to replace this motor with no more wires with one that we just procured, and I'll go ahead and show you the second corner which I cut during the initial placement of this motor on the GTR 90 and how to prevent this from happening in the future. Okay, these are all the surgical instruments we're going to need to do our operation on our wounded GTR 90 micro quad. We have flush mount wire cutters, needle nose pliers, 8mm wide Emax fabric tape. We have a mini toolkit screwdriver set, which I find extremely useful because it has Torx heads, flat heads, and Phillips head screwdriver bits. These are very simple to use. Take it out, and you're good to go. MG Chemicals 6337 solder, 22 gauge, 2.2% flux, leaded. We also have a temperature adjustable digital soldering iron. What I normally use is a temperature of about 450 degrees. Secret sauce, Loctite thread locker, blue 242. And of course, the Diatone 1104 6000. Motor. Says save 5% on all orders over $30 until January 31st, 2019 with a coupon code of 5FPVJAN19. Comes with screws. Links to all of these products here will be in the video description below. All of these products, to include this mini repair toolkit screwdriver set, are between $5 and $10 with the exception, of course, of the soldering iron, which at this time of filming of this video is about $30, and the Diatone 1104 6000 motor, which is $12. So all these products will be linked in the video description below for your convenience. First thing we want to do is make sure that the screws that they sent us with the motor actually don't do any damage to the motor when you mount it. We want to make sure that the motors obviously are long enough to go through the motor guard and the carbon fiber to mount the motor securely. But at the same time, we don't want the screws to get so far up into the motor that they're actually making contact with these coil wires. So we've got to check the length of the screws to make sure that they're not going to do any damage to the motors. First of all, we'll go ahead and stick the motor on here. Then we'll take a look at this short little screw and see if that fits. This short screw is not going to be big enough to mount the motor. So we'll take a look at the longer screw they sent us. This longer screw is too big because it will go up inside of the motor and actually burn out the motor if we try to mount it with these screws. So fortunately, I had some screws in a 2mm screw kit, and I've got this one, which to me looks like is the perfect size, because we don't want the tip of the motor going beyond the bottom silver portion of the motor, but we do want it to go in to the screw hole. So we want it to go into the screw hole, but not above this silver rim bottom of the motor, because if it goes up above that, it's going to get into the coil windings of the motor and do damage to the motor. So we're going to go ahead and use these screws. Now when we initially put these on, we're not going to tighten the screws down. What is that? It's a hex screw. We got a flat head on here, so I'm just going to go over to my little toolkit and get one of these bits out. Move that out of the way. It's perfect. So we're going to stick this in here. Stick this in here. Okay, now that we have two of those screws in there, let's go ahead and do another quick check to make sure that they're not actually going up into the motor itself to do damage to the motor. So as you can see here, the top of the screw is making its way between the bottom of that silver rim and the top of the silver rim. So as long as it doesn't go up to the top of that silver rim, we're good. And based on what I see here, these screws are the proper length. So we're not going to put the other screws in right now. We just want to hold the motor in place so that we can get the correct wire length to solder the wires on to the ESC. These three pads here on the ESC. Okay, now what we want to do is measure the motor wires, make sure that the inside one is going to go to the inside pad, and we've got enough room to do that. And then we're going to cut it off there at the end. We want to make sure that they're slack. So I'm going to cut that right there. This middle one, want to make sure that that goes there. So we got enough room there. And then this last one here is going to be the shortest one, and it's going to go right there. Then what we can do is just use our fingernails to strip the end of it off. Now we're going to tin the motor wires. Now we're just going to solder the motor wires on. To the ESC. Now before we actually test this motor out, we want to make sure that we've got the props off, because we don't want to fire this thing up with the props on inside the house. That would be dangerous, and we want to be safe. Okay, got the props off. Now we're going to test to make sure that our soldering actually works and this motor is actually working before we tape the wires down and finish putting the additional screws in the bottom. So we're checking to see if this motor spins when I arm it. Okay, it's spinning. And we know motors 1 and 4 are supposed to spin clockwise, and 2 and 3 are supposed to spin counterclockwise. So let's go ahead and check the direction of the motor spin on this one. It is spinning properly, counterclockwise. So we don't have to change any of the motor direction. So we don't have to change the motor direction for this motor that we just installed, which is a good thing. So we're done checking it out. The secret sauce that we want to use to make sure that this motor does not come detached from the motor arm like the previous one did, which resulted in us having to do this repair, is this Loctite thread locker Blue 242. So what we're going to do is put some of this thread locker on the screw as we screw it in. So we're just going to take a little bit of the Loctite Blue 242, put it on the actual threads. Doesn't take much. Screw it in. Do it again on the other one. Doesn't take much. Screw it in. Now remember, we didn't do that on those previous two ones, or on the first ones that we put in there. So we're going to take those out and put the Blue 242 on those as well. Okay, those are in. We've got Blue 242 thread locker on all 4 of the motor screws. So those motor screws and that motor will not be coming off of this quadcopter arm anytime soon. Now this stuff will keep the bolts, the motor screws, secure to the motor, but at the same time, it's removable, as it says here on the tube. So just with a little bit of hand torque, you can go ahead and get the screws out. It's not going to be impossible to get the screws out for you if for some reason you need to change the motor. So now all we have to do is position the wires where we want them, then go ahead and tape them down. Get a piece of our Emax 8mm wide tape. And if any of you are wondering what this fuzzy thing on the end of the quadcopter is, it's just a piece of foam that I've got placed over a adjustable volume audio microphone, which allows me to get live audio from the quadcopter into my goggles while I'm flying, so I can actually hear the motor noise while I'm flying the quadcopter, which helps me do altitude control and throttle management better than if I were flying silently. So all I did was I just installed a microphone onto the quadcopter, which is attached to the video transmitter, and I put a piece of foam over it to cut down on wind noise. Okay, so let's go ahead and now that we've got the motor installed, make sure it still spins properly. And she's looking good. Operation complete. GTR 90's healthy again. Put the props on, take her out for a spin. Key points to remember. Make sure that the motor screws do not make contact with the motor windings inside the motor, because you'll burn out the motor, possibly the ESC if you... Second thing is, use the secret sauce. Loctite thread locker blue 242. Keep the motor screws in the motors and the motor mounted in the quadcopter frame arm, and you won't lose the motor. That's the corner that I cut last time when I put the motor on this particular quadcopter. I forgot to put the thread locker on the motor screws. Therefore, the motor screws came out, motor got loose, wires got ripped out of the motor, lost the motor, had to get a new motor. This is only about $5 or $6 for a tube, which will last you forever. No, not forever, which will last a very long time, or $12 a motor for this particular quadcopter. That's it. Pretty simple. I hope this helped you out. If you liked the video, hit the thumbs up button below. Remember to subscribe to TMAC FPV channel. We appreciate your time. Thanks for watching. Happy flying.